Hello, everybody.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, Mike.
Hi, Mike.
Gorgeous outside.
Mike.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, Mike, you need to look at your agenda for next week and let me know. I sent you an email.
Yep, I will do that tonight. I know
Okay.
I meant to do that Monday, but got a little off track.
That's okay. I was just giving you a quick reminder.
It is 7 o'clock. I am going to call this meeting to order and remind everybody if they wish to comment to please add your name and address in the chat box, please. Roxanne, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Davis?
Here.
Mr. Dombrowski?
Here.
I see you. Mrs. Engel?
Here.
Mr. Malone?
Here.
Mr. Marshall? Mrs. McGrattan? I saw her. Mary, you're muted.
Okay, I'm here.
Okay, see ya. Thanks. Mr. Sebelia?
Here.
Mr. Soms?
Here.
And Mr. Washington?
Here.
8 here, 1 absent.
Thank you. We have no presentations. At this time, I'll open the floor to comments of residents and property owners. You are limited to 3 minutes. If you've sent a letter, your letter is in the record. I'm just going to go down the order of the chat box and start from the top. Bill and Jill Thorne, 3 Adios Lane. You're up.
Hi, Linda. This is Bill Thorne. I'm just want to speak in support of Allison Angelini for the ad hoc zoning board. She's the best. At least I know, and she's very knowledgeable about farms and farming. So, and Jill would like to speak also.
Well, I'm just speaking in support of Andra and the remarks that she made last week that have been misrepresented, it appears.
I mean, she's just looking for another opinion, sort of a contrary opinion. I mean, that seems reasonable that we should be able to support that.
Thank you, folks. Next, Nate Woody, 770 Long Cove Road.
Thank you. Regarding item number 9, as a member of that ad hoc committee, I'd like to update the council that the committee has been moving forward with the work that it was tasked with. Attendance by members has been excellent. The meetings have been open and transparent, and the discussion among members has been frank and productive. The committee continues to move forward in a productive fashion. As far as the chair goes, the job of the chair of any committee is to be prepared for the meetings, run the meetings, ensure the meetings are legal, and run down anything needed by the committee. By that metric, there's no question that Allison has been doing her job well. It is not the chair's job to be an expert in all things before the committee, nor is it their job to have all the answers. As a member of the committee, I think Allison has done a great job, and I commend her and thank her for the effort. I hope the council agrees and sees fit to voice its opinion similarly. Thank you.
Thank you, Nate, and thank you for your efforts as well.
Thank you.
Let's see. Hey, Nicole Cruz-Glacken, 5 Allen Lane.
Yep. Good evening, it's Nicole. Before I even begin, I just want to say that I do have something prepared that would definitely take more than 3 minutes. So I would like to have more time, not because I feel like I'm more important than anyone present here tonight, but we all know that I am at a center of a conversation that is going to be had tonight. And since I have stepped into that situation, I feel like I owe the community, not just those who have been supportive, but those who may not agree, a full explanation as to what I was asking for and why it was I was asking for it.
The chair will give you 5 minutes.
Thank you. I was not asked about what I meant by cultural competency or social justice. I was asked how it would be implemented, whether the town council itself would engage in cultural competency training or the community relations committee would host a social justice speaker. I'm here tonight to say that I believe it should be both, and that both should extend to the Board of Education. Here are some reasons why. Last summer, the country and the world were outraged over the murder of George Floyd, which sparked massive protests. I asked Town Council if they would be making a unified statement, acknowledging what none of us could ignore. One response I received was that a town resource page was not the place to have such dialogue. However, on that same page, St. Patrick's Day was acknowledged, not because it was part of their culture, but they had grown to appreciate a culture that was not their own. However, during the month of February, which is dedicated to Black history, nothing was said about Black history, but I digress. I can only hope that after hearing the experiences of prior students, you have learned that not only would have been an advantageous political move, but one that would have acknowledged the humanity of the BIPOC community in this town before they had to put their pain on display in order to be seen and heard. Even so, we had a sitting Board of Education member mock the racial tensions in our country, the LGBTQIA community, substance abuse, indigenous culture, and COVID. We all know how many have died. Some posts were as follows. One man says to another, "Let's play pretend. I'll pretend I'm wearing a mask. You pretend yours works." Another, alluding to the fact that a certain political party only panders to Black Lives Matter and the LGBTQIA community and Antifa, reducing who we are and our experiences to mere follies, and far too often our attempts to align those striving for progress with groups we have labeled radical, terrorists, and un-American, rather than human beings with valid struggles. A third, where white women are yelling at each other, one yelling, "I'm a Native American," the other, "I'm a hoe is not a tribe." I didn't want to get political tonight, but I can't help but ignore that these come from members of a party who promote personal accountability. I asked tonight, where's the personal accountability? I suggested the aforementioned training to create an environment in our town based in transparency and understanding. Transparency, because we recently had 2 additional Board of Education members colluding to bury language in an equal opportunity plan policy in an attempt to keep the public off of their back. Because if the language was too specific, then the public may actually expect them to adhere to their responsibilities. Understanding, because with regard to social services, leaders in our town doubled down on the use of the terms cherry picking and double dipping. So I asked tonight for any of those leaders present charged with dispersing such services, if they themselves have ever had to cherry pick or double dip in order to survive, like keep a roof over your head, feed your children, pay your bills, acquire affordable health care, or remain in a marriage or relationship. I have. Because like Eminem said, these food stamps don't buy diapers. I know. Some may be wondering why I care based on what my life looks like now. Indeed, my husband has created a very comfortable life for our family. However, my privileges now are not an excuse to ignore those who continue to suffer, nor can I use them to erase my past. I bring this up to say that I relate to those grappling with conflicting feelings, wondering how to address great disparities within a country they've been taught to have unwavering dedication to, or wondering if it is possible to let go of ways that may be all they have ever known. Because I am a daughter of a mother who was emotionally and physically abused in an attempt to make her miscarry after she refused to abort me because I was Black. I am a daughter who was robbed of the opportunity to ever know my biological father because he was Black, and he died when I was 12. So I know what it's like trying to preserve a love after being hit with such harsh realities. Also, being complacent is what allowed my dependents to convince me that I did not have an unhealthy and dangerous relationship with alcohol for 20 years. However, after traveling down such a destructive path for so long, I am approaching 3 years of sobriety in July. The first step was acceptance, and growth not only came with personal determination, but with the support of a village, because change is possible. To expand more on my comparatively comfortable life, all the comforts that my family enjoys did not prevent my son from being stopped by a alleged police officer who during the early mornings on his way to work stopped him to ask him where he was going and if he needed a ride. I can only speculate as to the intentions of that officer or whether he stopped and offered We're well-meaning or not, but we must know better than to stop young Black boys for no reason. Likewise, the size and location of my house did not prevent a neighbor from taking pictures of my son and his friends. The explanation for such an act included the word strange. I'd like everyone in attendance tonight to think about what would be so strange about seeing a tall Black boy and his friends, even if that were not the norm in your neighborhood, when you've probably seen that same boy on a daily basis since 2013, and how that made me feel as a mother. My 5th grader came home with a Native American research project where the children were incentivized to come to school for extra credit dressed up as Native Americans. I was pleased with the response that I got from administration and his teacher when I said that it was culturally insensitive and borderline cultural appropriation. However, I could not wonder how long that had lingered, how much longer it would have lingered if I had not said anything, and how many resources like that are still lingering in our community. Educators don't know how to address tough topics because of inadequate guidance and fear. For these reasons and more, I feel that the town should create a paid position for an advocate to serve as a mediator between residents and the town. And the Board of Education should create a paid position for a diversity and inclusion and equity advisor who can aid in creating a culturally responsive educational experience. Ultimately, it is my belief that social issues cannot be resolved by solely focusing on the individual. I am not opposing personal accountability, but rather asking that we do not divert our attention away from the social constructs that have greatly influenced reasonings for division, and as such created the practice of investing in certain communities while divesting from others, producing unequal outcomes based on identity. We did not get here by accident. Now that I have shared experiences, the strength that I pull upon, and the reasons why I still hope, I can only have faith that anyone who proposes a counter to social justice does so with like urgency, not to preserve what already is, but to create a more equitable society. And to any counselors who so choose to make a statement tonight, I hope that it is more than what was said last summer, especially if you said nothing. Thank you.
You're muted, Linda.
Okay, next up is Ann Holland, 824 Colonel Ledyard Highway.
I just wanted to say that we stand with Nicole. You need to listen to understand intentions, and you shouldn't silence Black voices. That's all, thank you.
Mr. Cherry, 5 Whippoorwill Drive.
Good evening. Went to the budget public hearing this week, and I want to thank both Mr. Soms and Mr. Bronner for good presentations, good explanations. Hopefully there were more people on the video link than there were in the auditorium, but it looks once again that we didn't have a whole lot of interest in the budget, and people are going to be surprised. As Mr. Soms so eloquently explained, how tax bills may change due to a confluence of influence, a lower mill rate, a higher assessor rate, less revenue. What does that mean to you, and have you looked? And you should if you haven't. And then on a quick diversion, I agree with Nicole. I agree with others that have spoken. I strongly support the debate of ideas, the discussion of policies, the discussion of programs. I strongly am against any mention that attacks an individual for what they may feel or think. I think if we keep it on a level of facts and policies and what should be done, we can all understand where we're going and how to get there. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Treaster, would you state your address, please?
Thank you. Eric Treaster, 10 Huntington Way. Wish to address the council just briefly regarding agenda item number 9. As you know, as some of you know, I've been following the ad hoc committee working on the agricultural regs very, very closely. I think that the members are taking it seriously. I think Allison has done an excellent job. She even tolerates me, which takes a special talent. I just want to state on the record that it's a very, very difficult job. There's lots of varied interests at stake, and I think they're making progress. And I think the members and especially the chairman's doing a wonderful job. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Wendy Hellickson, 14L Lakeside Drive.
Yeah. Let me start my video. Okay. I'm not really. I didn't have any prepared remarks, but I was listening to Nicole speak. And Nicole I thought she did a very eloquent, good job of explaining her position. But I wanted to give you guys an anecdote of something that happened to me recently. And I feel that will be illustrative of kind of, I think the ideas that Nicole wants to put forward. So I was standing on, I think it was Saturday, with Nicole and with Hillary, and standing out there with our signs. And I saw one of my students, and I don't work in Ledyard, I work in Groton, but I saw one of my students, and he was a former student of mine, graduated a few years ago. I was very happy to see him, and we gave each other hugs and asked what he was doing. And he told me how happy he was to see a teacher there and standing there and standing up for him. And he said to me, and I'm going to get like teary-eyed, he said to me, I never knew that teachers supported me. Now I'll tell you this kid is a very dark-skinned African-American kid. And he said, I never knew that you guys supported me. And I was like, of course we, it never dawned on me that he would even question that. And that to me was like a very touching moment in my life. And it's like, if this child who I supported through 4 years of his education and taught him in many different, in lots of different classes in a variety of roles, didn't think that all the teachers support him in his learning and his education. And I know it's just one kid, but I think that illustrates the point, is that there's a lot of work to do. And Ledyard is a good town with a good heart, and it's good people. And I am not from Ledyard originally. And that doesn't mean that just because there's one thing that happens in Ledyard that needs work doesn't mean that Ledyard's a bad place. Ledyard's a wonderful place, but Ledyard needs a little work in this area, maybe a lot of work. Anyway, that's all I had to say. Could have been more cohesive had I prepared something, but thank you for your time.
Thank you. There are a number of comments, but no addresses or anyone asking to speak. Is there anyone asking to speak? Seeing none, I will move to, whoops.
Linda, there's one more. It's Alex of 824 Colonel Ledyard Highway.
Okay, thank you.
Or, oh, it's
okay.
Alexis.
Yes.
That far.
Hi, I just had a question for Councilwoman Ingalls. I was wondering if she'd be able to clarify what the counter to social justice would be and why that would be appropriate.
Mrs. Adcock, Ms. Adcock, the town council does not get into dialogue at this time of the meeting. Ms. Ingalls, I'm sure, will speak under councilor comments, but I will always remind everybody this is a meeting in public. It is not a public meeting. A meeting held in public, not a public meeting. So we do not, this council nor most councils that I've ever been involved in going years back, we do not get into dialogue at this time. However, I expect that you will hear more from Ms. Ingalls. Was that fair, Ms. Ingalls? Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak at this time? I missed one the last time. I don't want to do it again.
I don't see anyone else.
Okay, thank you. At this time, are there any committee, commission, or board reports? I don't see any commissioners that haven't spoken. Comments of town councilors. Any town councilors wish to comment at this time? Mr. Washington.
The only thing I'm going to say at this point is I'm going to hold my comment till we get to the community relations committee portion, but I will have a comment that will be probably lengthy.
Thank you, Mike. Anyone else have any comments? Ms. Ingalls. Mr. Psalms, did you have your hand up first?
No. I was going to tell you Andra had her hand up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. So I suspect several of you are here specifically to hear my statement regarding comments on a counter perspective to cultural competency training and social justice. Some of you are genuinely seeking clarity. You heard something you didn't understand and you want to hear the rest of the story. So thank you for attending tonight's meeting. Others of you have completely bypassed civil discourse and jumped to the worst conclusion. If your mind is already made up, please know my comments are directed toward those who sincerely care to understand. A good friend of mine teaches at a high school in another state. Very recently, the school administration declared that the math department is a white space. Perhaps you've heard of the growing trend to regard the disciplines of math and science as racist. The math department chair, a Black woman, is utterly shocked and dismayed. My friend teaches history at the same school. He was recently instructed that when grading reports of his Black students, he is no longer allowed to comment that the presentation was articulate. He too is dismayed. What high school student wouldn't benefit from that feedback? And did he really just receive explicit instruction to treat his Black students differently from all others? Where did this come from? Cultural competency training. The morning after last week's meeting, I found an interesting invitation in my email. It was to a live streamed discussion titled Liberty and Justice for All, a conversation on social justice and identity politics with Jason Riley and Donna Brazil. The description for the event read in part, and I quote, longtime Democratic strategist Donna Brazil will join Wall Street Journal's Jason Riley to discuss the growing phenomenon of identity politics and their respective perspectives on what social justice means. Why does identity politics matter? Is it controversial or just the way things have to be in a divided society today? Is it possible to return to a time when everything is not about your race or your political party? Is social justice now equivalent to racial justice? Can we return to a time where people can actually reach across the aisle to agree on policies that benefit all? End quote. Well, that had my attention. It especially piqued my interest because both debaters and the moderator are Black. I very much wanted to hear these issues discussed by an all-Black lineup. I attended the event, as did Councilor Psalms. It was very informative. The debaters agreed on almost nothing, except that the conversation was worth having. One takeaway for me was that even people who have experienced racism firsthand do not agree on questions of social justice. These two thoughtful debaters had counter perspectives on this serious issue. If you have questions about what those differences are, I highly recommend investing 90 minutes to listen to their discussion. It will be worth your time. As for me, my fellow counselors will confirm that I typically appreciate hearing more than one side of an issue. I suspect it annoys them sometimes, but in doing my best to faithfully serve the residents of our town, I can't not ask, and I make no apology. Let's get all the ideas on the table, sift out the bad, find the good, and chart our path. That is my statement, except to say thank you to the many people who reached out to me with love and support these last few days. A little love goes a long way, especially in this climate, and I cherish your friendship. That's my statement.
Thank you, Ms. Ingalls. Any other counselors? Mr. Solms.
Evening, everybody. I did attend that session with Councilor Ingalls because she invited me, but I want to give you my perspective on what happened that Wednesday night. As Councilor Ingalls mentioned, she is an inquisitive person, and I will second and confirm that. Councilor Ingalls and I often have deeply different views, but she questions, I question, we debate, we argue, but we listen to each other. In that Wednesday night session, when Councilor Ingalls asked what's the counter, I thought the next question should be, well, wait a minute. What are we talking about? What training was delivered? Who got it? When? Should we look at it? Is it something we should learn about? That's how you move forward, questions. And I also want to say, so lastly, I want to say I support Councilor Ingalls. As I said to the newspaper reporter, I was surprised with the way she said it, but she was asking a question. And I think questioning is vitally important to our democracy. So I want to comment on one thing that Ms. Glacken said. I learned something tonight, and I'm going to bring it up because it's a perfect example of how we need to educate each other. I stopped one night in the pouring rain to ask a young Black man walking from Ledyard High School home. He was going the other direction from the direction I was headed, but I knew who he was. So I rolled down my window and I asked him if he wanted to ride home because I also knew where he lives. And he had a long walk, about a mile. He said, no, thank you. I never forgot that because I couldn't figure out why he wouldn't want to ride home soaking wet with a mile to go. I learned tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Solms. Any other counselors wish to speak at this time? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the public hearing minutes as well as the regular meeting minutes of April 14th.
Councilor Dombrowski moves the motion.
Second, Councilor Washington.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? Roxanne, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Malone?
Yes.
Mrs. McGrattan? Mrs. McGrattan? Oh, you're muted. I see you said yes. Okay, Mr. Sebelia?
Yes.
Mr. Solms?
Yes.
Mr. Washington?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Abstain.
Mr. Dombrowski?
Yes.
Mrs. Ingalls? You're muted. Shake your head.
Yes.
Okay. 7 in favor, 1 abstention.
You have a communications list. I would invite all of the counselors to be sure you look at the communication list because there were a number of messages coming in to specific members, and we tried to gather as many of them as we could and put them into the communication list. So while you may not have received all of those individually, you should be able to view all of them on our communications list. I have no referrals this evening. We will move on to council subcommittee and liaison reports. Admin, please.
The administration committee has not met since the last council meeting.
Are there any questions for admin? Hearing none, community relations.
Okay, I'm going to read a short statement and then I want to add something to it when I get done. I will be as clear as I can. Based on my experience with this committee as a chairperson and discussions with both sitting councilors, Solms and Ingalls, I support and welcome their participation in open discussion. To be clear, the topic of social justice, as I define it, is simple. Treat people fairly. From the many discussions with both councilors, They have expressed this same sentiment. To that end, our mission is focused on being an advocate for residents encountering discrimination when accessing town services. The committee will also make recommendations to the town council that promote that mission. So I want to, as a chairperson, I want people to understand when this topic came up, we, both counselors, and I'm included, we asked a ton of questions. And the Nicole Cruz-Clacken mentioned about social justice. And my response to that was a simple one. I know what my belief is on social justice. She mentioned the presentation. She told me who provided the presentation, which I sought out, and I've seen that the slides on the presentation. But what's critical to remember here is the information that was available when someone said, this is the topic. Their definition, their presentation is not knowledge to me, not knowledge to the people who sit on the committee. So to just blindly say, yep, I'm in, that's not me. I don't think it's the counselors I sit with, because we ask a lot of questions. We want to know what it is. And then the other topic comes into the idea of doing a social justice or something on cultural, relative to cultural competency. Thank you. We have this, the committee's purpose here is we're advocating to make sure there isn't discrimination and with people trying to receive town services. That's the mission. That's the mission. Okay. To that end, okay, what we need to do is make sure that what comes to the committee and how it's going to interact with people who are coming to the town for services. It may be that it's something the committee needs to go through. Maybe after we go through it, we say, you know what, this is something that needs to be done on the town council level. Maybe it's something that should be town-wide. So the whole discussion at the last meeting was to meet on the 5th, okay? And we told Nicole, everybody who was there, and I'm amazed how many people were here. Hopefully everybody who shows up today will show up for the 5th for discussion, okay? I see a couple people, Rebecca Rebner, thank you. She's been helpful. But we have very few people who actually tune in or participate or provide discussion. So to that end, I think our goal is a simple one. We're trying to make sure that people who come to the town of Ledyard to get services from the town of Ledyard aren't discriminated against. There are other things that can grow out of this, but that is the mission statement as it is right now. It may expand. I've learned a couple things. I got to thank Nicole Cruz-Clacken for this, because some questions I've asked kind of surprised me. There's definitely things that need to be done within the town. Okay, just from what I've gathered coming back, and I'm waiting for some response time. But I want to go back. I am fully in support of both counselors who sit on this committee. Okay, if we can't have an open discussion on a topic, and if somebody misspeaks or something is taken out of context, they should not be destroyed. If we're going to turn this, I don't want to see a situation where it's a single color palette, where there's no ability for somebody to ask a question or feel comfortable asking the question. Because if we don't educate people, period, and I'm not talking about my committee, I'm not talking specifically about the town, I'm not talking, if people aren't educated on a topic, then there will be no growth, okay? And people talk about it all the time. People talk about it all the time. Go ahead. People talk about it all the time. People are gonna get uncomfortable, okay? And people have to be prepared to get uncomfortable. Everything Nicole's talked about is on the money. There's a book out there that How to Be an Anti-Racist, which I had read. And it's an interesting book for anybody who wants to read it. It gives an excellent perspective. I've read it talked to my sister about it. And I laugh only because I could have wrote the book. And it's really enlightening. And I'm gonna probably bring it up at our May 5th meeting. But bottom line is the mission statement here, as it's defined, is we're trying to make sure services aren't being provided to members in the town. They're not encountering discrimination, getting those services provided by the town. And if that means, based on information that's come out and things that have been learned recently, that there's training out there that may move in that direction. And that's how Nicole mentioned something that I did not know about that particular training. I've actually reached out and I've got the slides related to that training. And I know who the contact person is. And those may be something that we want to bring forth to the town relative to membership, to the people, the employees. But I'm going to say something that I was told never to go off topic, because I'll say what I mean, and is that if the expectation is to have a we can have a meeting talking with the town on a whole basis about race and inequities and things of that nature. But historically, from things I've seen, what ends up happening is we end up preaching to the choir. And so some of the things I've asked out, and I had a couple emails that came in, I've said, what can bring in people with different opinions on the issue? And just looking at what took place where somebody made a comment and the backlash on the comment versus people who wanted to have an understanding of what the basis of the comment is part of the problem. And let's be brutally blunt on this. Does the town have issues? Yeah, the town has issues. I've lived here in the 70s, okay? But I'm not about to say that everybody in this town is bad. And if you're talking about racism, you're talking about prejudice, there's a separation. Racism is like capitalism, and communism is an ism. It's a system versus prejudice. We can do stuff to correct the stuff that's the racist substruct, but then we still have to address the issue with prejudice and the people who would I say profit off that system. Okay, those are two different animals. I don't think the committee is going to be able to address all of that in a year by any stretch. It took a shitload, excuse the expression, it took a long time to get to where we're at, and we still got a long time to go. And that's the end of my comment. And anybody who wants to debate this, I'm always free to talk about it. Come to the meeting on the 5th, come to the community relations committee meetings. As Nicole will tell you, we don't stop people from talking. We want to hear people's positions, their comments. We're looking for input. We accept it. We invite it. Come on the 5th. That's all. Thank you, Councilor Davis. My mic was on.
Thank you, Mr. Washington. Let's see. Any questions, specific questions for community relations at this time? Next up would be finance, Mr. Solms.
The Finance Committee had its regular meeting on Wednesday, April 14th at 5 p.m. via video conference. The committee discussed possible changes to the capital improvement plan and the capital non-recurring fund based on new information regarding the American Rescue Act. Although no new information has been received, there are specific requirements for use of the money, but it cannot be used for bridge replacement. The committee and the mayor are hopeful that the restrictions on the ARA might be loosened in time to help with the Lantern Hill Bridge replacement rather than the temporary repair. So we didn't recommend any changes to the budget at that time, at least for capital. The Finance Committee also discussed the property tax for 384 Colonel Ledyard Highway, Iglesias Fuente de Salvacion Misionera, a nonprofit church that purchased the parcel as taxable property. We will take it's still on our agenda. We will take it up with a motion to resolve the issue at our next meeting. Committee also met in a special session at 5 p.m. on April 27 to discuss possible changes to the budget based on public feedback. After some discussion about capital line items, the committee voted to recommend the budget without change to the town council, and everything else is on our agenda for tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Solms, and to your committee for your hard work, your hard budget work. Much appreciated.
You're welcome.
Any questions of finance? I'm sure you may have some questions as we get farther into the agenda. Land use, Mr. Dombrowski.
Land use is not met, so I have no report.
Thank you. Any questions of land use? Other liaison reports. Mr. Dombrowski.
So first report is on the agricultural committee. They've been meeting, they're moving forward. They're putting together a survey to be sent out to the farms. That should be going out shortly. So far, they're doing a very good job. So they're moving along very well. And my other report was I was going to report on the agricultural ad hoc committee for the rewriting of the regulations, but Mr. Woody and Mr. Treaster have already pretty much commented everything that we've done so far.
Mr. Dombrowski, Dabrowski, would you do me a favor, especially since we have a big audience? I found that a lot of people are confused between the Agricultural Commission and the ad hoc committee. And maybe in hindsight, we should have named it something different, because you can see where there would be some
confusion, right?
Yep.
So the ad hoc committee is their sole purpose. It's a short-term committee established by the town council based upon a request through the Planning and Zoning Commission, is purely to look at the zoning regulations or a proposed set of zoning regulations to do with farming and farming activities, to regulate or not regulate. That's the decision that the committee is making, to put forth a set of zoning regulations to go to that would be provided to the town council here probably within the next couple of months, and then those would be forwarded off to the Planning and Zoning Commission for their for them to figure if they want to adopt, amend, or change in some way. And I just got an update on the survey to the farmers actually went out last week, so an update for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dabrowski.
And the Agricultural Committee, their task is to basically to look at the farms that are in town and to advocate, get a list of all the farms that are in town, get a list together of specific soil farms that may be available for additional funding that falls out of like the PA 490 Act for selling of the development rights to the state on larger farms, which PA 490 does. But this would allow possible grant applications for smaller farms in order to keep them solvent and that kind of thing. So it's to help the smaller farms. That was based upon some state statutes that had gotten passed in the last several years. And in order for the town to participate in that matter, we had to put an agricultural committee together to do that legwork. So they're two different things. One's just looking at the zoning regulations to provide to the Planning and Zoning Commission for possible adoption. And the other is to actually look at the farms and help and provide information to farms and in the town that could need some help. That's all.
And both committees share some members.
And there are committee members that are shared between both. Correct.
Thank you. Any other liaison reports? Mrs. McGrattan.
Yes, the senior commission met this afternoon, and they do a curbside lunch every Wednesday, and it is very successful, and I mean financially successful. Also, they are doing the paperwork and whatever else needs to be done to get the new senior van. That's all.
Thank you, Mrs. McGrattan. Mrs. Ingalls.
The Board of Education had their regular meeting on April 21st of last week. They are at level 5 of their phase-in plan for in-person learning, all grades, 4 days a week, with Wednesday being a virtual learning day. They are seeing a reduction in opt-out students, and the last day of school is June 16th, and graduation is June 18th. Plans are being worked out for the ceremony as the date approaches. They are waiting for additional guidance from the state, but the plan is for the event to be as normal as it can be. And that's my report.
Thank you. Any other liaison reports? Mr. Soms.
I have a WPCA report. They met last night. Maximize this thing. So they discussed ways to alert residents about water main breaks. There have been a number of water main breaks which get notified and passed around on Facebook. But they talked about a way to better notify residents, including WPCA members who don't have any way to know that there's a water main break. So the plan is to have Groton Utilities send an email directly to the towns so that the MIS director can use the town news alerting system to send out notifications about main breaks. So the chair will be contacting the MIS director to see if they can work that out. I think it'd be good for the residents and also good for the town news system so that more people can get more notifications from the town about other things like weather, road closures, parking, etc. The WPCA also discussed the money the town will receive from the American Rescue Act, some of which is targeted for sewer plant projects. The wastewater treatment facility supervisor is working on a list to submit to Mayor Allen for consideration for the use of these funds. And this would include the Ledyard Center sewer options and future plan improvements. They also discussed a long-standing problem at Fox Run Apartments, an undersized water meter with a bypass that allows water to flow to the occupants even when the capacity of the meter is exceeded. They've known about this for years. But the cost of a new meter that would handle the full load is $22,000. So there's no way to know how much revenue the WPCA is losing when the meter is bypassed because it doesn't flow through any measuring device. The WPCA questioned whether ARA funds might also be applied to the cost of the meter replacement. We're not sure that it would, but we thought it'd be worth asking. In addition, the WPCA decided to compile a list of potential water main extension projects to submit to the mayor for consideration for ARA funds. The specific language accompanying the act states, in part, to make necessary investments in water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure. And as I mentioned in my earlier report, we can't use this money for bridge replacement. So we're looking seriously at water and sewer. Past due receivables continued to decrease to $12,500 in March from $13,000 in February, and that is my report. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Saul? Any other counselors have liaison reports? Just too quickly, the farmers market opens June 2nd. We're going back to the old days of farmers markets. It won't be quite as restrictive this year. And the food pantry will be closed the week of May 9th as we begin our move to the Red Barn. Any other liaison reports? Hearing none. Mayor Allen.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Just dovetailing into Councilor Som's last comment, as he knows, and I think all of you know, I support the extension of public sewer infrastructure. It's something that, you know, if we get a one-time inject of funds from the American Rescue Plan, it's something that will pay dividends by way of economic development for the next 100 years. So I'll look forward to getting the list from the WPCA and see if there's things that we can do that wouldn't be supplanting of other funds and still be able to do that. So thank you for that, Councilor. I will again mention that our S&P bond rating improved. They removed the negative outlook on the town of Ledyard, citing positive continued fiscal management. So that was a plus for us. The reason I say that again is because yesterday we had our bond sales. This was for selling debt for the 2 new schools in the town of Ledyard. We were also permitted to look to refund some debt, as you know, at lower interest rates. We went out with $18 million of bond sales, and for the first time that I can remember, and others too, when the clock stopped, we had not sold our debt. And that was shocking to all of us, including those that issued the debt in Wall Street and others. So we had a call at lunchtime about, okay, what do we do to continue moving it? Because we had about 60% of it sold. But if we don't sell that debt, we have a huge problem with our school projects. And as you know, we have more debt to sell. So the decision was made to go back on the market in the afternoon on Wall Street and try for 2 more hours to sell debt. And what we did was we increased slightly, like by a matter of 10 or 15 basis points, which each basis point is 0.01% of interest. But what we ended up doing was we went back out in the afternoon. We still didn't sell all the debt that we needed to sell in the afternoon session, but the issuer agreed to purchase the remaining $3 million. So we were really sitting there scratching our heads and concerned about what went wrong. And it turns out that it wasn't anything that Ledyard did. It is that there is a very mild appetite for municipal debt on Wall Street right now. So it's something that we just need to consider and keep keep in the backs of our heads is that it's not just a matter of borrowing money and then going out there and selling that debt. And yesterday was a good example of that. So I will also give you a quick COVID update. The data has been stable for the last 6 weeks through the Legislate Health District. They issue every Thursday afternoon their latest numbers. So we're going to hope that week 7 in a row will also fare well for us. There's 8 hospitalized at L&M with 0 in the intensive care unit, and there are 6 in Bacchus with 1 in the intensive care unit. The concern area that we have right now is that the number of new variant cases on the western part of the state are increasing. The mask mandate will expire on May 19th. When that occurs, it's going to be up to the legislature, probably also the Department of Public Health, the State Department of Education, and other agencies to continue requiring efforts if they deem appropriate. So we're going to stay tuned on that and see what happens when the executive authority ends, and I will keep you up to date. Really positive news for Ledyard, though, is the 65 plus population in Ledyard. We're at 97.09% that have had at least the first dose, and almost 91% have had both doses. Dropping down to the 45 to 64 crowd, we're at just over 60% and almost 42%, again, first and second dose. And then the 15 to 44s are at 37% and just almost 17% for 2 doses. So that group is still improving. I posted something on Monday, I believe it was, about the fact that they have now changed from a appointment only model at Foxwoods, which is Hartford Healthcare, and Mohegan Sun and Mitchell, both of which are Yale New Haven, that you do not need an appointment. The interest, for whatever reason, is declining. I think part of it is tied to the Johnson & Johnson issues, but there is no appointment needed, and you need to check with each of them, but generally they are doing Pfizer vaccinations. The food pantry build out is nearing completion. I think they have the main floor flooring done, and at this point they're trimming it out, and then that will be ready to go for the, I think it's the May 18th opening, which would be a Tuesday. So very excited to see that moving along, and we'll get everything relocated over there and set up. The other project that's taking shape is the lighting. The new lighting for the Parks and Rec Senior Center has arrived. Because the Public Works gentlemen are still actively finishing up the food pantry, they're not going to be able to yet do the lighting in there. But as you know, you approved the expenditure for that. It was much needed. The lighting in the senior center in the large room in the Dieter room is almost 30 years old. So the new lighting is actually sensitive to the daylight. So if the light outside is higher, it will actually reduce itself inside to save energy. So it's going to be an impressive project, and we're hoping to get that done as soon as possible so that when it fully reopens, it will be done. We also received our municipal grant and aid from the state of Connecticut. That is $421,085 for funds. That is road money that comes in every year. That number has been consistent, I think, for about 6 years. But nonetheless, we've got it. So it's actually available for us to use starting on July 1st. The number's been stable for 5 years. The ARP funding paperwork was received. We have completed that paperwork, sent it back to the state. That's the American Rescue Plan funding. We're expecting 50% of the anticipated proceeds to arrive between July 1st and August 15th. The second inject of that funding comes at the same time a year later. So July to August of 21, and then July to August again of 22 for that funding. The bond sales I covered today, we have Department of Emergency Management and Homeland Security. We have COVID meetings every single week. And today I was happily informed that we are now moving to an every other week model. So that's, I think, positive news, and it's positive news in the sense of the direction that we're headed. And then the last piece that I wanted to share with you is that Eversource had reached out to me they are offering grants to 501c3s in municipalities. So these are community impact grants. They range from $500 to $2,500. So if somebody is interested in some information on that, is looking for a community impact grant, we can provide paperwork, and we can provide you, more importantly, the contact at Eversource, so that hopefully your 501c3 can get grant funded. And that is all I have for tonight.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Any questions for the mayor?
Linda, I have a question. This is Tom Malone. So, Mayor, I just have a question. It's really a general interest question. On the corner of Whalehead and Vinegar Hill Road, it looks like they're doing a significant amount of work on the electrical grid infrastructure there, putting down a bunch of wooden planks and other things. Do you know what that project is?
Yes, Tom, I met with the residents at Fawn Drive on that over the winter. Eversource has a 175-foot easement through there. And as you can see, based on where you see it now at the corner, it's still wooden pylons that hold those transmission lines. They're updating all the old wooden H towers to the rusted steel monopoles. So it's part of their storm resilience project and work. It's part of their the changes in the environment, and so they're doing what they can to protect it as best they can from the storms. So that work should be nearing completion fairly soon. And then they're going to be removing all those, they're basically like railroad ties that they put in to work around those marshy areas. They're going to remove all those once those monopoles are replaced.
So that's similar to the work they've done up on Long Cove?
Exactly right. Yep, exactly.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for the mayor? Hearing none, we have no old business. Would anybody like to amend the agenda under new business? Would anybody like to remove any items on the consent calendar? I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Councilor Dabrowski, I move the consent calendar.
I second Mary McGrattan.
Motion made and seconded. Roxanne, would you call the roll?
Mrs. McGrattan?
Yes.
Mr. Sebelia?
Yes.
Mr. Soms?
Yes.
Mr. Washington?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Dombrowski?
Yes.
Mrs. Ingalls?
Yes.
Mr. Malone?
Yes.
8 in favor, 0 opposed.
Moving on to admin.
I make a motion to set a virtual public hearing date on Wednesday, May 12th, 2021 at 6:30 p.m. to receive comments and recommendations regarding proposed amendments to ordinance number 100-010 and ordinance establishing a housing authority for the town of Ledyard.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded. Discussion. Mary, did you have anything?
No, the ordinance is already in place, and we're just going to add an appendix that would set the amount of money that the housing authority would pay in lieu of taxes.
Thank you. Roxanne, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Sebelia?
Yes.
Mr. Soms?
Yes.
Mr. Washington?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Dombrowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Engel,
Yes.
Mr. Malone.
Yes.
8 in favor, 0 opposed.
Thank you. Next item.
I make a motion to appoint Ms. Amy Yaris, unaffiliated, of 135 Gallop Hill Road, to the Legend Farmers Market Committee to complete a 3-year term ending May 9th, 2024, filling a vacancy left by Ms. Kelly.
Second.
Ms. Yaris has talked to the members of the Farmers Market Committee, so she is aware of the time commitment and responsibility as a member of that committee.
Any further discussion? Yes, Mr. Soms.
I would just like to thank Ms. Kelly. She did a wonderful job as market master and put a tremendous amount of work into the farmers market. And I also thank Ms. Yaris for stepping up. I think she will also be great.
Thank you. Roxanne, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Soms,
Yes.
Mr. Washington,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Dombrowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ingalls,
Yes.
Mr. Malone,
Yes.
Mrs. McGrattan,
Yes.
Mr. Sebelia.
Yes.
8 in favor, 0 opposed.
Motion carries. Moving on to finance. Mr.
This is
Soms.
Councilor. Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to adopt a proposed certified resolution, State of Connecticut Department of Economic and Community Development Grant, structural survey for the historic Uptown Sawmill as contained in the draft dated April 14, 2021.
Councilor Malone seconds.
Thank you. So the sawmill itself is a reconditioned, rebuilt building from a very old site. It's a pleasurable site and educational site for people to visit. People actually come from many communities and many miles around. As councilors may recall, any grants that any organization in the town applies for must be approved by the town council, because grants are free, but sometimes they purchase things that cost money to maintain and support. This is one of those things. This grant will be paid for in full. It will conduct a structural survey of the mill, and that will enable the mill, if they decide that it's of interest, if you will, that will enable the mill to get additional grant money to keep it moving. And it does need more money. We've got some big projects coming up there to do some repairs.
Any questions from Mr. Soms?
Yeah, this is Councilor Malone. I would just echo what Councilor Soms said with regard to what we typically term as life cycle cost. Many times we get grants for new equipment, you know, smart boards, what have you, security systems, body cams, pick something. But then, you know, 3, 5, 10 years down the road, that it's incumbent upon the town to maintain the life cycle cost. And so we have to be cognizant of that.
Any other questions? Roxanne, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Washington,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Dombrowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ingalls,
Yes.
Mr. Malone,
Yes.
Mrs. McGrattan, shake your head, I can't hear you. Okay, there you go.
Yes.
Mr. Soms,
Yes.
8 in favor, 0 opposed.
Motion carries. Next item, Mr. Soms.
I move to approve a transfer not to exceed $8,500 from account 210-90305-58915 CNR Undesignated to account 210-10103-54500 Historic District Building Maintenance for costs associated to the lead abatement in the caretaker's quarters at the Lester House. In addition, upon receipt of Able Housing $1,000 security deposit, appropriate the funds to account 210-90305-58915, CNR Undesignated.
Councilor Malone seconds.
Discussion?
So as many of you know, all of you know, the Lester House has some paint that contains lead in it. And we have a family living in the structure, and we've undertaken and we have underway a project to remove some of the lead paint in the inside of the house. And this money is associated with the continuing work that has to be done to get the lead out of the house. Specifically, what's being done is they're removing paint from inside the window track, the sash tracks, and they're also putting carpeting down to cover the floors, which is an approved method for controlling and removing exposure to lead. This particular transfer has to do with the carpeting. And there's one other thing, I think, correct, Mayor, not just the carpeting, because the carpeting was $35.
No, this is also temporary housing allowance for the occupants while they're displaced from the home.
Thank you. I meant to mention that. We have to get the family out of the home. They have animals on site, and they would prefer to move into an RV so that they can remain on the property, which we think is a good idea.
Any other questions for Mr. Psalms? Hearing none, Roxanne, would you call the roll?
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Dombrowski?
Yes.
Mrs. Ingalls?
Yes.
Mr. Malone?
Yes.
Mrs. McGrattan?
Yes.
Mr. Sibilia?
Yes.
Mr. Psalms?
Yes.
Mr. Washington?
Yes.
8 in favor, 0 opposed.
Motion carries. Next items, Mr. Psalms.
This one we do once a year, hopefully once a year this year too. I move to adopt a proposed fiscal year 2021-2022 budget in the amount of $60,295,817, comprised of a general government budget of $26,623,848 and a Board of Education budget of $33,671,969.
Councilor Malone seconds.
Any other discussion on that, Mr. Psalms?
Yes, we had a long discussion last night about ways to reduce the tax levy portion of the capital improvement program, the capital budget. We're about $43,000 ahead of last year, and we thought maybe we could find a way to eliminate $43,000. I talked to 2 department heads yesterday, secured agreement that perhaps we could postpone some work on the town buildings to the tune of $30,000. I also inquired about server and computer purchases because the budget, the fund for computer replacement held about $40,000 at the end of last year, and the request was for an additional $40,000. I was hoping that we could get $13,000 from that. I learned that the actual balance is now down to $22,000 because we had to replace a 12-year-old server, and we should never keep servers that long. We have another one sitting waiting to be replaced, and we need to set aside money for about $10,000 for replacement in the police department building. So we debated for some time. We decided that the risk is not equaling the advantage of saving the $43,000 because those dollars have to be spent at some point. So we decided not to kick the can down the road and keep the budget as it is. But I thank the counselors and also especially the department heads for their quick response and willingness to consider the request.
Thank you, Mr. Psalms. Any questions from any other town councilors? You know,
This is Councilor Malone. I was kind of the one who prompted the pay once, cry once kind of mantra here on this particular thing for the 43,000. We sat down and figured out roughly for if let's say your tax bill was $10,000, which most people's isn't in our town, you would have to pay an extra $30 this year, versus a pay twice, cry twice idea of putting off and saving the money this year to only pay more money maybe next year or the following year to make those same repairs and or maintenance costs. So that was my logic and thinking. And I applaud Councilor Psalms for trying to work with the department heads who were, as he said, very diligent in trying to make it work for us, as they always are when we make a request of them to trim their budget and or sharpen their pencil. So it was a solid discussion. It was a good discussion, and I think it was worthwhile.
Thank you. Any other comments? Roxanne, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Dombrowski?
Yes.
Mrs. Ingalls?
Yes.
Mr. Malone?
Yes.
Mrs. McGrattan?
Yes.
Mr. Sebelia?
Yes.
Mr. Psalms?
Yes.
Mr. Washington?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
8 in favor, 0 opposed.
Motion carries. On to Mr. Dombrowski.
I make a motion to adopt the proposed amendments to ordinance number 100-018, an ordinance providing for archery hunting on certain town-owned lands. In addition, adopt proposed amendments to Appendix A, the Town of Ledyard hunting rules and regulations.
Is there a second?
Second.
Councilor Sebelia, second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Discussion, Mr. Dombrowski?
So this update to the changes or the amendments to this ordinance was because the original ordinance was based upon on archery hunting on 2 parcels within the town of Ledyard that were owned by the town. That would be the Clark Farm on the northern part of Colonel Ledyard Highway, and Founders Preserve down on towards the Groton end of Colonel Ledyard Highway. The Founders Preserve property, we are in the process of transferring over to Avalonia Land Conservancy. And part of the stipulation of that transfer is that the archery hunting would be allowed to continue to operate, but we needed to revise this ordinance basically to state that town-owned lands or other approved lands, and add that on to say that the former Founders Preserve down at the bottom of Colonel Ledyard Highway is still allowed for archery hunting and administered through this ordinance.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Dombrowski or further comments? Roxanne, would you call the roll, please?
Mrs. Ingalls?
Yes.
Mr. Malone?
Yes.
Mrs. McGrattan?
Yes.
Mr. Sebelia?
Yes.
Mr. Psalms?
Yes.
Mr. Washington?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Dombrowski?
Yes.
8 in favor, 0 opposed.
Motion carries. I'd like to move to approve a vote of confidence for the chairman of the ad hoc committee to develop a zoning regulation amendment for agricultural uses in the town of Ledyard and its committee members. Is there a second, please?
Councilor Dombrowski seconds.
Thank you. First of all, let me just apologize. I'm slightly losing my voice, so I'll do my best here. I personally asked this motion to be put on the agenda, mostly out of frustration. I have attended or I've listened to every meeting of the ad hoc committee. I've read all the correspondence. And I'm extremely frustrated that the chair has been put in a position of having to defend her qualifications at every single meeting due to insults in public comments and correspondence. At the last meeting, it was mentioned that she was just a farmhand in the past, so not qualified to represent the livestock community. I disagree, but regardless, Ms. Angelini was not selected to be on the committee as a representative of any specific farm community, but as a representative of the Agricultural Committee where she serves. We are so fortunate to have such a highly regarded and dedicated individual willing to volunteer at a time when volunteers are often difficult to find. Why would somebody want to volunteer and then be insulted at every single meeting? In addition, the constant call to change the makeup of the committee at every meeting continues to be just plain silly. As you are aware, it was the town council who created the committee upon recommendation of the Planning and Zoning Commission. And the council has no intention of changing the committee makeup at this time. The committee will be finished with their task at the end of June. This committee, as with other ad hoc committees, was created primarily with representatives from other town boards, commissions, and committees. And finally, the idea that changes to zoning would be made without public input is a further insult to our volunteers in our town. Do these commenters really think we meet in a dark room filled with smoke and make these decisions? Thank you, Planning and Zoning Director, Zoning Chair, Mr. Woody, for explaining the process once again that statutory requirements will be followed. This motion is simply my effort to show support to Ms. Angelini in the committee, and I hope other councilors will join me with their support. Any other comments? Mr. Dombrowski.
Yeah, so as the town council representative to this committee as well, I applaud the chair of Miss Angelini in the act that she is performing. She was elected chair by the members of the committee. She's taken on that role very well. And I think she is administering and handling the committee meetings in a truly efficient manner. As we all know with zoning, it's like herding cats. So you have a whole bunch of different opinions between the members of the zoning commission, planning and zoning commission, myself, the farmers, and all those other members. So it's working through all of that to try to make sense of what would be the right path forward for regulations regarding farming within Ledyard. The committee in a whole is working very well together, and they're making progress. Ms. Angelini is doing an excellent job, as you have indicated, Ms. Davis, to continue to lead that effort, and is doing an excellent position. And I don't see any reason why we should in any way consider it a waiver that she should not continue to be a representative from the Agricultural Committee on that board and continue on as chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dombrowski. Any other comments? Hearing none, Roxanne, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Malone?
Yes.
Mrs. McGrattan?
Yes.
Mr. Sebelia?
Yes.
Mr. Soms?
Yes.
Mr. Washington?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mrs. Ingalls?
Yes, I think you missed Mr. Dombrowski.
Yes. Yep.
Yes.
Okay, that's 8 in favor, 0 opposed.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank all those that wrote letters also in support of how the meetings are run. I really appreciate that, that support for her. I do not believe we have any other items on our agenda. Seeing none, I would like to ask for a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Motion's been made and seconded. This meeting is adjourned without exception. Thank you all for coming.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.